The international conference aiming to put an end to the civil war in Syria preeminently occupies the international agenda. But the conference is far from promising, as the participating forces share little in common for a solution. UN withdrawal of invitation to Iran after international pressure intensifies disagreements amongst the participants. Moreover, Syrian National Council is not expected to play a strong representative role because of internal conflicts. And PYD, aiming to guarantee the future of the people in the region through democratic governance in Rojava, announced that it would not participate in peace talks in which the autonomy of the Kurds is not recognized. On the other hand, the demand of transitional government without Assad, which is raised by Syrian National Coalition and supported by the Western countries like USA, France and Britain, seems unlikely to be realized because of Russia's clear and insistent opposition. Preliminary meetings for Geneva II have started in Montreux this Wednesday and will continue in Geneva. The Syrians who had to migrate because of the civil war expect not much for Geneva II. The Syrians at Atma refugee camp close to the border of Turkey tell that they don't have faith in the international society any longer. We have no expectations for Geneva II. We do not trust them anymore, they say. On the other side, Cemil Bayık, co-president of KCK Executive Council, takes attention to the fact that the forces participating in Geneva II are not the Syrian forces, but the ones outside of Syria, and says, "How will the decisions taken in Geneva be implemented in Syria? There is no any force capable of implementing these decisions. Geneva II has borne death." The democratic autonomy is declared in the Cizre canton of West Kurdistan after the completion of work for a transitional executive assembly. Declaration of autonomy coincided with the first anniversary of the founding of Kurdish Republic of Mahabad. Mahabad Kurds in Iran on 22nd of January 1946 was declared to establishment under presidency of Qazi Muhammad. Kurdish Republic of Mahabad, despite the recognition by the United Nations on 17th of December, was able to survive 11 months and then occupied by the Iranian army. Cizre Canton Declaration has came 2 weeks after the decision to split West Kurdistan into 3 cantons. After the declaration of a Cizre Transitional Executive Assembly, which will deal with economic, political, social and cultural matters, preparations will be made for elections 4 months later. Work towards democratic autonomous government began in December 2013 following a proposal by the PYD and is continuing in the other areas for a transitional executive assembly and democratic autonomy. At a meeting on 6th and 7th of January at the West Kurdistan Autonomous Administration Legislative Assembly, the region, Rojava, was divided into 3 cantons, Cizre, Kobani and Afrin. In accordance with decisions taken at that meeting, each canton is establishing its own autonomous administrative assemblies. While accepting the social agreement with the character of a constitution, the meeting decided the 3 cantons would each have their own autonomous administration. This model is based on 4 principles: canton system, legislative assembly, administration, justice and high election council. According to the decision of the Legislative Assembly, the cantons will organize elections within 4 months in order to establish democratic autonomous administrative assemblies. The Cizre canton will have an assembly with 101 deputies. The other cantons will establish the number of seats according to their needs. All communities in the region, Kurdish, Arab, Assyrian, Chechen and Armenian, will be represented in the Legislative Assembly. This assembly, part of a decentralized system, is seen as a model for a future democratic Syria. Kurdish, Arabic and Syriac have been designated as official languages of the Cizre canton. Ekrem Hasso, who has been elected the president of the Cizre canton, will be accompanied by Syriac Elizabeth Gevriye and Arab Hussein Ezem as vice-presidents.
Journalist Ahmet Dicle writes on Geneva 2 on his article for this week. Everyone is around the table in Geneva expect the representation of Syrian people. The above words belongs to Haitham El-Menna and put in a simple way the nature of Geneva 2 conference, which is promoted as the hope by the hegemonic international forces. The national coordination is ignored by the hegemonic international forces because of its populist democratic character. For the Western forces, Syria means not Syria itself, but rather the table where they can play their Middle East cards. Shia-Sunni conflict in the Middle East, which Iran stands on one side and Saudi on the opposite, leads potentially to a war establishment. United States and Israel prefaces this potential as a danger and continue the business as usual in order to eliminate the danger, namely by making the conflicting forces combat. With this perspective, USA can bring peace to Syria only as much as it has brought previously to Iraq. The exclusion of Kurds already proves in advance that Geneva 2 cannot bring a solution. USA openly took a position against the independent representation of the Kurds in the conference. It was an expected attitude because Geneva 2 is designed not for the representative of the people, but as a playfield of those forces who impose projects upon people, as El-Menna puts it. After all, Kurds will not take part in Geneva 2, as Kurds as much like as the true opposition forces or other ethnic, religious or political groups of Syria. However, Kurds can invalidate the war game imposed on Rojava and Syria by strengthening their democratic autonomy and their self-defense forces. For this purpose, they have to create a collective with all the people of the region, mainly with the Arabs. Any step taken to this end means a step to peace. Rojava can create the true Geneva in Rojava.
Turkey's National Intelligence Organization, MIT, was again caught transporting weapons to Al-Qaeda-related Salafist groups like ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. After saving a suspicious truck from the prosecutors and gendarmerie on 1st of January, when the government called it a state secret, MIT this time hit the headlines with 7 semis reported to be laden with weapons. On 19th of January, the prosecutor of Adana Anti-Terror Court instructed the Adana Provincial Gendarmerie Command to stop and search 3 trucks. Around noon, a security detail of 200 personnel stopped the 3 trucks with a car in which there were 2 MIT officials in Adana. After explosives detecting dogs gave appropriate signals, the prosecutor allowed steel containers in the trucks to be opened. In 6 metal crates, concealed among medical supplies, were mortar shells, rockets and various other ammunition. While the trucks were being moved to nearby Seyhan Town Gendarmerie Command for a detailed search, the trucks were blocked by MIT personnel from their Adana regional office. At that point, the governor of Adana, Hüseyin Avni Coş, the provincial police chief and the MIT regional director arrived at the scene, accompanied by 200 policemen. Then district governor and the Adana Provincial Gendarmerie Command, warning that the MIT was attached directly to the Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Then vehicles were released under the governor's instructions and continued on their way towards Syria. When the first 3 suspicious trucks were stopped, MIT personnel tried to save the other 4 trucks from searches, but they too were stopped by the gendarmerie. The head prosecutor of the anti-terror court said they could not give a list of items found because the investigation was confidential. Peace and Democracy Party co-chair Selahattin Demirtas on Tuesday at Parliament asked to the government, if the trucks were loaded with aid, they would trumpet them with celebrations and with live broadcasts. Would the Justice and Development Party, AKP, carry aid to Syrians in a hidden way? PDP co-chair Demirtas also underlined that it is Turkey's support that created Al-Qaeda. In addition, Cemil Bayık, co-president of KCK's Executive Council, remarked that with these trucks, crisis inside Turkish government, everybody saw that one more time, supporting of Turkish state to the Al-Qaeda. And he said that, actually, war of Al-Qaeda in Syria is war of Turkey. It has been already proved.
Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan responded to the British newspaper The Guardian, which was responded to an editorial the British paper previously published. On Thursday, 5th of December 2013, The Guardian published an editorial article on the occasions of Nelson Mandela's death. The article included a significant comparison between Mandela and some other names like Jawaharlal Nehru, Aung San Suu Kyi and Öcalan. Here is the full text of Öcalan's letter to The Guardian. I am writing in response to an editorial published in your newspaper on the occasion of Nelson Mandela's death. The article drew comparisons between Mandela, Nehru, Aung San Suu Kyi and me. Such comparisons belying a hegemonic mindset demonstrate a lack of understanding of the reality of those faced with struggling for freedom. In describing me as feared and worshipped, I detect hostility towards those who are forced to rely on their self-beliefs in their struggling against slavery, massacres and policies of denial. Since I have been imprisoned under conditions of solidarity confinement on an island for the last 14 years, it is difficult to see how I can be credibly described as a source of fear for everyone, except perhaps my captors. Such a description belittles the 4 decades of struggling for freedom of the 40 million Kurds who see me as representing their will and have placed their trusts in my efforts to reach a peaceful and democratic solution to the Kurdish question. In that respect, I can say in all modesty that, dear Madiba, and I have more parallels than contrasts. He managed to bring an end to the apartheid regime as a leader in whom the South African peoples had placed their complete faith in his commitment to peace. He has become a shining star for the people of Africa. Our historical mission is to ensure the ever-brilliance of this star for the peoples of the Middle East. Negotiation and struggle are both important processes in determining the future of people's movements. It is not those who are feared, but rather those who have the confidence of their people that can lead those processes. Abdullah Öcalan, the prison islands of İmralı.
Thousands of people rallied in order to commemorate Hrant Dink, an Armenian journalist who was murdered in 2007. After 7 years assassinated Hrant Dink, ceremonies were also held across Turkey, Kurdistan and worldwide. While the main demonstration took place in front of Agos newspaper in Istanbul, where Dink was murdered, other ceremonies were held in several cities including Ahmed, Izmir, Dersim and New York. Buradayız Ahbarig, we are here brother, people shouted regardless of whatever cities they joined the demonstrations. In these several ceremonies, which have been held across Kurdistan, Turkey and through the world, demonstrators chanted slogans like, "We are all Hrant, we are all Armenian," "Killer state will account," and "We are stubborn, Hrant is our brother." The commemoration held also in London, Ayvalık, Dersim, Hozat, Samsun, Toronto and Amsterdam. Ceyda Sungur, known as the Woman in Red from Gezi Resistance, is not satisfied that the police officer who gas-sprayed her is being prosecuted. She wrote an article in Turkish press about attitude of AKP governments to the Gezi Resistance. We share parts of her article without any comments with you.
I didn't want to speak until now, as I didn't want to change the symbolic values of the women in red. And I didn't want to make an individual more important than the movement itself. But now I feel I owe an explanation, especially to the families of those who were killed during Gezi. No one should talk of justice until the killers and those responsible for the killings are punished. During the 7 months since Gezi, no case has been brought against the police for those they injured. It is clear that this prosecuting will not go beyond using the influence a photograph had internationally and beyond an attempt to quash the rebellion of millions. Prosecuting officers whose job security and working conditions are dictated by their superior is no consolation for those who lost their lives, suffered brain injuries, lost their eyes, broke their limbs and sustained other injuries, and for their family and those of us who managed to stay alive during Gezi. How unfortunate that the following were not wearing a red dress.
Ethem Sarısülük,
When he was shot in the head by a police bullet.
Abdullah Cömert,
When he died after being hit on the head by a tear gas canister.
Mehmet Ayvalıtaş,
When he was run over by a car during the protest.
Medeni Yıldırım,
When he carried a placard against the construction of a police station.
Ahmet Atakan,
When he protested to demand the killers be punished.
Ali İsmail Korkmaz,
When he was beaten to death. Berkin Elvan did not commit a crime other than going to the shops to buy a loaf of bread. When he was shot in the head by a tear canister and has been in a coma since June, and earlier this month celebrating his 15th birthday still in a coma. Just because those people were not accidentally captured in a press photo cannot be an excuse for not prosecuting and punishing those responsible for their death and sufferings. Of course, today we cannot talk about a justice and equity in a system which prosecutes journalists fighting for freedom of speech, lawyers helping those unjustly treated, and academicians defending independent science, and protects those responsible for the killings of Hrant Dink and many others. Despite all this, nothing will be forgotten, and this unjust treatment will not be accepted. Justice will only be achieved through fighting for our rights, and I believe Berkin will wake up for this.